The invitation lay on the kitchen table between the electric bill and a pizzeria ad. A white envelope with gold embossing. Unmistakable. Alice found him first. "Mom! Mom, is this a wedding?" She burst into the room, waving the envelope, and I put down the laptop. The half-finished quarterly report remained on the screen. I reached for the envelope, and my fingers, dry with short-cut nails, 20 years at the keyboard, trembled slightly. Den Pulaski and Diana Zim invite you to share the joy. I read it twice, then again. The letters didn't change. And then I noticed a note, a single piece of paper tucked into an envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar, rounded, teacher-like. "Laura, it's important to me that you come. I want Alice to see that we're not enemies. Diana." I placed the note on the table. My shoulders rose as usual, slightly up, slightly forward, as if my body were expecting a blow. This habit remained from the times when I listened to footsteps in the hallway, heavy, uneven steps. "Are we going?" Alice looked up at me. 13 years old, but her eyes were still the same. Daddy's, gray-green, with red dots near the pupil. "Mom, please." "I will think." "Does that mean no?" "It means I'll think about it, Alice." She sighed as if I'd denied her oxygen. She went to her room, and I remained sitting in the kitchen and looking at the note. Diana didn't know who we really were. She didn't know the most important thing, and I really wanted it to stay that way. In the dresser, in the far corner of the bottom drawer, under a stack of winter scarves, lay a white envelope. Not a wedding one, a regular mailing one, with a green logo in the corner, a Christmas tree made of steps, and the title, Steps. Inside lay something no one was supposed to know about. Den and I got married in 2012. I was 25, he was 27. He worked as a design engineer for a construction company, and I was an accountant for another. We joked that we were building the same thing, just on different budgets. A silly joke. But back then, we had enough silly jokes to feel like a team. Elisa was born a year later, and for the next 6 years, everything was fine. Not perfect. Fine. We fought about money, about vacations, about who would pick up the child from daycare. An ordinary life. An ordinary family in a 2-room apartment on the suburbs of Chicago, with humming radiators and a view of the garages. We inherited the apartment from my grandmother, with low ceilings and wallpaper that I repainted 3 times because Den promised to change it and forgot each time. And then Den lost his job. The company closed. 7 years ago, in 2019. I thought he'd find a new job in a month, maybe 2. He's a good engineer, with experience and a degree. But the months went by, and he still sat at home. At first, he was looking, sending out resumes, going to interviews, coming back angry. Then he stopped looking. And then I started finding bottles. Behind the sofa, in the closet on the balcony, in the tool bag. I tried to get him out for 2 years. I talked, I begged, I screamed, I cried. I made an appointment with a drug addiction specialist, but he didn't show up. I poured out his vodka, but he bought more. I hid his money, but he borrowed from the neighbors. I stopped inviting guests because I didn't know what state he'd be in by the end of the day. I stopped planning my weekends. I stopped buying groceries for dinner for 2 because he ate dinner less and less often. Alice was 8 when she asked, "Mom, why does Daddy always sleep?" And I realized I couldn't go on. Not because I'd fallen out of love, but because I'd become afraid. Afraid of the sound of a key in the lock. Afraid of the evenings. Afraid that one day Alice would see something a child shouldn't see. We divorced in the spring of 2021, 5 years ago. The court, the division of property, just like everyone else. He didn't resist. He didn't even show up for the second hearing. Elisa stayed with me. And then in the fall, Melissa Pulaski called. My mother-in-law. My ex-mother-in-law. At night, at 2 o'clock. I jumped out of bed. Who calls at 2 in the morning, unless something terrible has happened? Laura. The voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. He's going to die. I can't cope alone. He hasn't left his room for 3 days now. I was silent. Alice was breathing evenly behind the wall. I'm not asking you to come back, said Mrs. Pulaski. I'm asking you to help. You're smart. You've always been smart. Think of something. I'll pay. She couldn't pay. Her pension was $2,000 and some change. Where did she get it from? I said I'd call back. I hung up. I lay down and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. In the morning, Alice was having breakfast and drawing. There were 3 people in the drawing. Me, her, and a man with broad shoulders. Dad. She drew him smiling, with 2 arms, 2 legs, standing up straight. Healthy. Alive. I called the clinic that same day. Angel is a rehabilitation center in the region. A 4-month program, accommodation and support. $15,000. All my savings for 3 years. I've been saving up for renovations. I wanted to finally change the wallpaper, install proper double-glazed windows to stop the drafts in the winter. 3 years, $100 to $500 from each paycheck. I scoured forums, read contracts, compared prices, just like I did every day at work, only instead of calculating estimates, I was calculating the cost of saving someone else's life. No, not someone else's. The life of my daughter's father. I transferred the money to the clinic's account. I asked the administrator to process the payment as a grant from a charitable foundation. She looked at me over her glasses, paused, then nodded. She said, "It happens. You're not the first." I signed the contract, took my copy, and put it in an envelope with the clinic's logo. The green tree made of steps is a symbol of ascent. That's how the administrator explained it to me. Ascent. A beautiful word for something that starts from the very bottom. Den wasn't supposed to know. He'd have refused out of pride. But I needed results, not gratitude. I needed Elisa to still have a father. Alive, sober, able to stand up straight, like in her drawing. Mrs. Pulaski recognized me by chance. She saw me at the clinic entrance. I was coming to sign a contract. She stopped on the porch and looked at me. "It's you," she said. She didn't ask. She said. "Please, no one," I asked. She took my hand. Her palm was hot and dry. "I promise," said Mrs. Pulaski. "I promise. I will keep quiet." And she remained silent for 4 years. In April, a month before the wedding, I went to Den's to pick up Elisa. She was spending her weekends with him, on schedule, every other week, as agreed upon in court. Den lived in a rented 1-room apartment downtown. After the clinic, he returned to his profession and found a job. His shoulders broadened, and he started going to the gym. His shirts tightened around his forearms, and he spoke more quietly than before, as if he were afraid of his own loudness. I rang the intercom. It wasn't Alice who answered. "Laura? Hello, I'm Diana." She stood in the doorway, short, with wide-set light brown eyes that made her seem perpetually a little surprised. She adjusted her bangs with her little finger, quickly, habitually, and stepped aside. "Come in. Alice is getting ready. 2 minutes." I walked in. I took off my shoes in the hallway and automatically lined them up parallel, an accounting habit. Everything has to be straight. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon. On the refrigerator hung a childish, bright drawing with the caption, "Diana Zim, you're the best." A student, not Alice. Next to it was a class schedule and a photo of a kitten. "I'm a teacher," Diana said, catching my eye. "Elementary school. The kids give them to me, but I can't throw them away." She placed a cup in front of me. I didn't ask, but I didn't refuse either. "Laura, I want to tell you one thing." Diana sat down across from her. No coyness, no preparation, no, "I'm so embarrassed, but..." She simply sat and said, "I know Den was drinking. He told me himself, on our second date. I almost left then." But they didn't leave. No, because he told me honestly, without excuses. He said, "I'm an alcoholic. I've been treated. I've been sober for 4 years. Anyone in my place would have left. But I work with children from all kinds of families. I've seen what happens when a person lies, and I've seen what happens when he tells the truth. Den told the truth." I listened to her and thought, she's not even 35, but she talks as if she's lived 2 lives. Teaching skills, probably, or just her personality. She was silent for a moment. Some foundation helped him, a charity. Den said he couldn't even remember the name. He was in such a state. I took the cup and took a sip. The coffee was bitter, without sugar. "It's important to me that you come to the wedding," Diana said. "Not for us, for Alice. I see children from divorced families every day. I know how torn they are when mom and dad can't be in the same room. We can be in the same room. I know, but Alice needs to see it, not hear it from us, but see it for herself." I nodded silently. Diana smiled, quickly, as if allowing herself to. And at that moment, Alice emerged from the room with a backpack. "You've met," she beamed. "Diana's cool, isn't she, Mom?" "It's true," I said. And I wasn't lying. On the way home, Elisa chattered nonstop. About Diana's cake, about her cat, about the 3 of them watching a movie. And I drove, looking at the road and thinking, you don't know Diana. You don't know that there was no fund, that $15,000 were mine, that without that money, there would be no clinic, no sobriety, no you. And I became afraid. 2 days before the wedding, Alice burst into the bedroom with burning eyes. "Mom, can I have Grandma's earrings? The ones with the green stones? They'll go with my dress." "Earrings?" I looked up from the screen. "They're in the dresser, in the bottom drawer. Look in the jewelry box." Alice ran away. I returned to work, and only after a minute did I straighten up. The bottom drawer. The chest of drawers. I jumped up, but it was too late. Alice stood in the hallway. In one hand, a jewelry box with earrings. In the other, a white envelope with a green logo, a Christmas tree made of steps. "Mom, what does angel mean?" She looked at the papers. "It says service agreement, and at the bottom is your signature." The world rocked. Not much, but noticeably, like on a bus when the driver brakes sharply. I walked over and took the envelope. My hands weren't shaking. I didn't let them. Over the years with Den, I learned one thing: keep a straight face when everything inside was crumbling. These are old documents, Alice. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. But it's Dad's name, Pulaski D. That's Dad, right? And what services? 13 years old. At that age, questions aren't asked. They're fired off in bursts. Alice. Mom, I'm not a little girl anymore. I'll still find it online. What are Angel? I can Google it in 10 seconds. And I realized she'd Google it. 13 and a smartphone aren't the age to say, I'll explain later. Angel is a clinic, I said. A rehabilitation center for people with addictions. Alice fell silent. She knew Dad drank. We didn't hide it. We explained it carefully, age appropriately, when she was 10. Did you pay this? She asked quietly. Yes. When? 4 years ago, in the spring of 2022. Does Dad know? No. She stood with an envelope in her hand. She had already forgotten the earrings. He thinks it was a foundation that helped him, I said. A charity. It was necessary. Dad wouldn't have accepted help from me. We were already divorced. He would have thought I pitied him, but I didn't. Then why? I looked at her. Gray-green eyes with red dots. Dad's. Because you need a father. Alice swallowed. She put the envelope back in the drawer, closed it, and silently hugged me. We stood like that for a minute, maybe 2. Does Diana know? She asked, not letting go. No. And Grandma? Grandma knows. She promised to keep quiet. Alice stepped back. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a quick, angry gesture, as if she was angry at the tears. I'll keep quiet too, she said. I promise. I nodded. And I thought, how many people were already keeping this secret? I, Mrs. Pulaski, am now Elisa. The secret was snowballing, and the more people knew, the higher the chance it would crumble. On the morning of the wedding, I pulled the dress out of the closet, a dark blue, high-necked one, bought especially for the occasion. Neither provocative nor mournful, just right in between. Alice twirled in front of the mirror, dressed in green, matching her grandmother's earrings. She looked more grown up than I'd expected. 13 is no longer a child, but she's not yet the kind of person who can bear other people's secrets without consequences. I put Diana's note in my bag, the one from the invitation. I don't know why. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe as a talisman. It's important to me that you come. We are not enemies. But I knew something she didn't, and that knowledge created a wall between us that Diana couldn't even see. The wedding was held at a country restaurant, 20 minutes from the city, pine trees, a terrace overlooking a pond. It wasn't fancy, but it was tasteful. I was sure it was Diana's work. On the porch were vases of wildflowers, not roses. I liked that. Simple and honest. Just like her. Elisa and I arrived by taxi. I didn't want to think about parking. I didn't want to think about anything except holding out until evening. Den stood at the entrance in a light gray suit. No tie. He hated them, ever since our wedding. 14 years ago, he'd pulled off his tie just like that, 5 minutes after the registry office, and stuffed it in his pocket. Some things never change. I approached. He smiled. Laura, thank you for coming. "Congrats," I said, and I handed over a box with a set of porcelain cups. A practical gift, an accountant's one. Alice rushed to him and hugged him. He lifted her up, and I saw how the fabric stretched across his shoulders, how easily he held her in the air. Another person, another body, another life. The life that I bought for $15,000 and silence. There were about 40 guests, relatives, friends, Diana's colleagues. I was given a seat next to Mrs. Pulaski, apparently, logically, former family. My mother-in-law looked good for her 66 years, in a beige suit with her hair neatly coiffed. She took my hand under the table. "Are you holding up?" she asked quietly. "I'm holding on." "Me too." "I remember, Laura. I keep my word." Diana was wearing a simple white dress. No train, no veil, nothing extra. She was adjusting her bangs with her little finger. She smiled in a way that made her light brown eyes turn completely golden. And I thought, she suits him. She really suits him. The ceremony was short. The registry office and a visiting registrar. Denis spoke quietly, as he always did now. Diana spoke clearly, a teacher's habit. Elisa sat next to me and squeezed my hand. After the registration, the banquet began. Toasts, music, salads, an ordinary wedding. Ordinary, and yet not. Because I sat here, among the guests, and knew something no one at this table knew, except for the elderly woman to my right. I ate, smiled, and answered questions. "Are you my ex-wife? How sweet of you to come. How civilized you are." One woman, Diana's friend, I think, even took a photo of Din and me and wrote something about a modern family on her phone. I nodded. Civilized, of course. If only she knew. Elisa was sitting with some teenagers, the children of one of the guests. She was laughing and showing me something on her phone. Occasionally, she'd glance back at me, quickly, checking. I smiled at her every time. She'd turn away a little too quickly. By 8 p.m. in the evening, Mrs. Pulaski was flushed. Wine, toasts, emotion. She was sitting next to Diana. The newlyweds were seated at a long table, their parents on either side. I saw my mother-in-law lean toward her daughter-in-law, saying something. Diana laughed. Mrs. Pulaski took her hand. I sat 3 chairs away and watched, and the anxiety that had been lingering inside me this whole time suddenly rose to my throat. Then Mrs. Pulaski stood up. She asked to speak. They handed her the microphone. She held it with both hands, her fingers trembling. Her beige suit hung neatly, but her face was flushed, and her eyes sparkled the way they do after a 3rd glass of wine and 2 hours of someone else's happiness. "I want to say," she began, her voice wavering, "I want to say that my son is standing here today, alive, healthy, sober. And it's no accident. It's not all his fault. There were people who helped him when I no longer believed help was possible." Din looked down. Diana placed her hand on his shoulder. "Diana," Mrs. Pulaski turned to her daughter-in-law, "you're a good girl. You love him. But you don't even know who he owes it to. Not to any foundation." I stopped breathing. Mrs. Pulaski fell silent. She looked at me, across the table, across plates and glasses, across 4 years of silence. And I saw in her eyes what she herself hadn't expected. The words burst out before she could stop them. She placed the microphone on the table. She sat back down. She said something about happiness and love, quickly, crumpled, as if she were patching a hole. The guests applauded. Someone shouted, "Bitter." But Diana didn't shout bitter. Diana looked at me. 10 minutes later, she came up to my chair and leaned over. "Shall we go out?" We stepped out onto the terrace. The pine trees smelled of resin, and the pond gave off a damp odor. The music from the hall came muffled, as if coming from underwater. "What did she mean?" Diana asked. "Not to any foundation. What was that about?" I stood by the railing. My shoulders rose, habitually, automatically. Defense, anticipation of a blow. Someone in the hall laughed, glass clinked. The usual sounds of an ordinary wedding. But here, on the terrace, it was quiet. Only the pine trees rustled, and somewhere on the pond a duck quacked. "Laura, please. I won't be angry. I need to understand." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide apart. Not a hint of accusation, just concern. The honest, mature concern of someone who wants to know the truth. And I told it, briefly, without unnecessary words. About Mrs. Pulaski's call that night. About Elisa's drawing. About the Angel Clinic. About $15,000, all my savings. About the request to register it as a grant. About what Den didn't know and shouldn't have known. "I didn't do it for him," I said. "I did it for Alice. She needed a father, a living father, not a grave with dates on it." Diana was silent for a long time. I counted the seconds. 4 years, she finally said. "You were silent for 4 years." "Yes. All those times we saw each other. You picked up Alice. We drank coffee. I told you about the foundation that helped Den. And you remained silent." "Yes." She turned back to the pond. I waited. Accusations, resentment, anger, anything. I deserved any reaction. But Diana turned back, her wide-set eyes glittering, but her voice unwavering. "So, without you, none of this would have happened," she said. "Not his sobriety, not his return to the profession, not our relationship, not this wedding." I didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. "You gave all your money to a man who disappointed you, to your ex-husband, to the father of your daughter." "I gave the money for Alice," I repeated, "not for him." Diana stepped towards me and hugged me. Not the polite kind of hug, shoulder to shoulder, patting on the back, but for real, firmly, silently. "Thank you," she said in my ear. "You gave me a husband. You didn't want it, but it happened that way." I stood there, not knowing what to do with my hands. Then I hugged her back. Neither of us moved. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, and music came from the hall. "Don't tell him," I said, stepping back. "Please." "Why?" "Because he finally believes he's managed it on his own. With the help of the doctors, with the help of the program. This belief is his foundation. There's no need to destroy it." Diana was silent for a moment. She adjusted her bangs with her little finger. "Okay," she said, "but I will know, and I won't forget." We returned to the hall separately. First she, then I. No one noticed, or they noticed but didn't pay attention. Mrs. Pulaski caught my eye across the room. Her eyes held questions and fear. I nodded slightly. Everything was fine. My mother-in-law exhaled, and for the first time I saw how a woman over 65 could look as guilty as a 5-year-old. Alice danced with Den. He led her awkwardly. Rhythm had never been his strong suit. She laughed. Her green dress flashed between the guests, her grandmother's earrings swaying to the rhythm. Den smiled, quietly, out of the corner of his mouth, as he always did now. I sat down in my seat and felt my shoulders sag. Slowly, as if someone had lifted a weight I'd carried for so long I'd stopped noticing it. 4 years. 4 years of tension, silence, fear. I opened my bag and took out a note. It's important to me that you come. We are not enemies. No, Diana, we are not enemies. But we are not just not enemies either. We are a family. A strange one, pieced together from fragments, crooked, not by the book. I am the ex-wife who secretly paid for her husband's rehabilitation. He is a man who doesn't know to whom he owes his debt. She is the woman who now knows, but will remain silent. And the daughter who keeps the secret because she loves us both. But family. Alice ran up to me, flushed, with her bangs disheveled. Mom, why are you sitting there? Let's go dancing. I put the note back. I stood up and went dancing with my daughter to where the music, laughter, and lights were reflected in the dark water of the pond outside the windows. My shoulders were slumped for the first time in 5 years.